Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Across the Park podcast. And boy, have we got a special for you today. We've always said from the start of when we first introduced the podcast and we brought it to your screens, and for anyone who's followed us from day one, we try our best to get Evertonians on as much as possible, to get different voices, to get different perspectives, different stories. Obviously, there's one huge story and a huge narrative that's following the club around at the moment. It could be argued that it's probably the most critical era in the club's recent history in terms of the battle that we're facing. And I'm delighted to bring onto the show today a recently acquired friend of mine. I think it's fair to say we shared some time over the early season, watched the game together.
Well, be honest about it, Gary. I emptied your fridge of Estrella, didn't I, with my son?
I was going to allow you to say that, but yeah, listen, again, delighted to be joined by Greater Manchester Mayor, Honorary Vice President of Leigh Centurions. That correct, Andy?
It is, yes.
And of course, massive Evertonian, Mr. Andy Burnham. Andy, cheers for joining us.
You're welcome, mate.
So again, a little bit of a joke there. Myself and Andy met at the start of the season in Spain, and we managed to watch an Everton game together. Got chatting. I've been casing him since then to try and get him on the show. And to be fair, I think that the delay, if you like, worked in our favour, because I don't think we could have got you on at a better time. And I do really appreciate you giving us your time, Andy. So without further ado, I just want to start on a bit more of a lighter note. I think most people who are tuning into this podcast are tuning in for one big reason, to get your opinion on recent events. However, I just want to give a bit of context to your affinity with the club, or affinity to the club. Talk to us a little bit about, Andrew Burnham growing up as a youngster. How did you get the Everton bug, as it were, and what does Everton mean to you, I guess, to this current day in your life?
I don't think it was a virus that I caught. It was baked into the DNA. It was no choice. So both of my sides of my family, Evertonians all the way back. So steeped in it, really. I can't even remember anything else. Went to Goodison in the early 70s for the first time. It would have been sort of 72, 73. Joe Royal, I think, was my first, but I was quite young at the time when Joe was playing, so just about have a memory of that. Born in the Old Rome, but my dad got a job in Manchester when I was 1, so kind of moved halfway in that direction. But we weren't just Evertonians; we were match-going Evertonians. Me, my 2 brothers, my cousins. As I say, whole family endeavour, whole family enterprise. This over a long period of time. Going right back, actually. My great grandfather. Get this one, Gary. He was a private in the King's Liverpool Regiment. Fought in the First World War. His last visit home went to Goodison.
Wow.
Back to his home on Scotland Road, and they were doing Irish dancing in the front room. He had a big thing about Ireland being criticised for not doing enough in the war, and he was a massive sort of arguing, saying they are, that they're out there. And sadly, died as a prisoner of war in the First World War. But just gives you a flavour of how much this goes back, basically, in the family. So yeah, growing up, Bob Latchford was my first big hero. But then, obviously, as the 70s became the 80s, imagine being a teenager when we were bossing it. Yeah, well, I saw it all. We went to it all, home and away, through the 1980s. I've got the photos alongside the cups. Goodison used to have, it's funny this, because we were members of the family club in the early 80s, and in 84.
What's the family club?
Well, it was like I don't know. I don't fully remember, but it was like it got you certain access to tickets and things. And,
so a bit like a membership type.
Yeah. It wasn't a family enclosure as such. It just was a family club. You got certain sort of opportunities to do things. We always Gladys Street all the way, as people who go in the street and know, you know, with me and my brothers and my dad and everybody. That's where we've always been, in exactly the same place, I have to say. Even when it was standing, we're still in the same place as now it's seating. But we got invited to Goodison, summer of '84. We'd obviously won the FA Cup and FA Youth Cup as well, I think, Charity Shield, and family photo in front of the 3 trophies. And wow. Fantastic. And then the next summer,
it was a decent summer the next summer.
Well, and it's a standing joke in our house, because the next summer we get this invite again, and we're driving down the East Lancs on a Sunday morning to go to this. And my mum is in the car saying, "Oh no, is this going to happen every year that we have to do this?" And we often recall that conversation in the car.
Yeah, unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. But yeah, no, that's really interesting. I thought that was important. You know, a lot of people will, you know, as you just said, then a lot of fans who are in the Gladys Street will have seen you week to week. Maybe others wouldn't, and obviously your current role as Mayor of Greater Manchester means that, you know, that there's a huge demand on your time. So just briefly, do you still get a chance to go to the games, and is that still a big part of your family life?
Yeah, massive. I've got a season ticket this year. It hasn't always been the case, you know, with the way my life has been. I've always sometimes been doing spot tickets, but this year I've got a season ticket. It was my dad's, actually. I've taken it over. So yeah, I mean, most of the last, well, even in my time in Parliament, I've been, you know, going out, you know, at least 10 home games a year, and, you know, more in most. So yeah, and it's a big part of us, really. I mean, the thing about people who don't understand the match and everything it involves is it's not really about the football, is it? It's an excuse to get with your family in the pub, and the football intervenes for a brief period and sometimes takes the day in a bad direction. But that's how we approach it, and we've just done it all of our lives. It's part of, you know, I say, the fabric of the family, really, and the way we work. So no, back with a season ticket, and yeah, I say always in the same place of the ground.
No, good to hear, mate. Before we get on to the off the field matters, then just obviously briefly touching on this season, what have been your feelings on the performances on the pitch, and I guess the manager's had a tough job since he's come in, but how you felt he's dealt with that, and you know, what are your feelings on the current playing squad?
Yeah, well, you and I, we were just referencing, weren't we, the game we watched together in Mallorca in the summer. That was a good performance, wasn't it? That Fulham game, the first game of the season. I just think it's spectacular what Sean has done. I can remember this time last year, I think it was the Southampton game. That was a pretty low point, that home game against Southampton. Well, and I remember being, two, wasn't it? And I remember, well, 2 goals he got, didn't he? And I remember being in the Spello after the game, and we kind of said, "Oh, what's happening here?" My brother just said, "It's got to be Sean." And I think it's one of those rare things where everyone just said, "Yeah, I think so," and it kind of just, everyone just sort of felt, you know, that had to be the case. What he did last season was miraculous, wasn't it? Given where we were and coming in that Arsenal game, I just, you know, that win at Brighton, that win and that performance at Brighton was incredible. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, obviously sort of seeing things in Decore and bringing him in and putting him centre stage, and, you know, really exceptional management, I would say. And then this year, I think they've been consistent and good, and playing better than we've seen for quite some time. And yeah, in the circumstances, incredible. Given if you think about it this way, I mean, obviously Villa last week, I think we probably all came away. The fact we're coming away disappointed from a game like that is a measure of the progress that Sean Dyche has made at Everton, isn't it? But we did come away a little disappointed, and I think it's been a long time that we've been going to the match thinking that we can get something out of everything. Now, I can't remember that for quite a long time, actually. You know, I don't see games as being written off under Sean. I was at Wolves away, actually, over Christmas, and that was probably the biggest disappointment I've seen. And, you know, and every club gets him, and there's no criticism of him. You know, it happens. But the fact that we're competitive in every game. We weren't in that one, but we have been pretty much in every other one, I think, is a measure of our progress. And the fact that we're going to the match thinking we could and should possibly beat Villa at home is yeah, I mean, that tells you what he's achieved. And the players as well, to be fair. You know, they seem together, don't they? Not so much noises off as we've seen in the past. They seem engaged. Obviously, there's some rumours about some of the players maybe heading elsewhere, but I don't see that affecting their performances. It seems like he's got a really good group and they're bought in, and that's great.
No, I couldn't agree more, mate. I've said it on so many occasions. I think that the great thing for me going to the game, not on top of what you just said around us competing, is just that I feel like there's a bit of an affinity and a bit of a feeling of compassion and understanding between the players and the fans for the first time. I feel like I'm buying into what he's doing. As you say, there's a togetherness there on the pitch, more than anything else. And yeah, I think that's helped massively in this situation overall as well.
I mean, I said, Gary, that I've not felt this for a while going to the match, and as much as I admire what David Moyes did at Everton, at times in his regime I didn't feel like that. There were games against the big clubs, certainly the away games. He just thought,
we got our belly tickled, didn't we, a few times?
Yeah, and so I just don't see that with Sean. He doesn't seem to sort of have that about him. He seems to have this view that we can be competitive in every game, and I do think the emphasis on fitness, it's frustrating at times, isn't it, where he won't play people and you think, oh, well, maybe just take a chance, and he seems to have really iron rules about it, doesn't he? But
definitely,
that actually is a big part of it, isn't it? Just seeing an Everton team, the amount of ground they're covering, the energy, that is something we've not seen either. So I personally couldn't praise him enough. I just think it's incredible what he's done. He's a good fit for us. And I remember tweeting earlier in the season, get behind him. And I really believe that. Get behind him and don't buy into this thing that I think there's one thing I would want to get over, this thing that, okay, well, we'll have him for now, but, when we're through these, no, definitely not.
You've been there before, haven't we?
Get behind him properly. Yeah. He's one of those managers that kind of, we've got a media that likes to talk people down, and they'd like to put a label as though he's unsophisticated on him or something, don't they? I mean, that's what they like to do, and I think fine, let them do that. I think there's qualities he's brought to Everton Football Club that we've not seen for a long time.
Yeah, again, just before we move on, I met with Sean a couple of months ago at a doing in Old Trafford. He was doing a talk there, and I had the pleasure of spending half an hour with him. And I come away again just being more and more confident that he's the man to take this club forward. The way he was talking openly about the players, about his approach to every game, about the fact that the preconceptions around the style of play. His response was, he just said, "You know what? I want to win football matches. I go into every game trying to come up with the best way of winning football matches." He said, and at certain times in my managerial career, I only had one way of winning football matches because of what I had at my disposal. He said, fortunately, he said, whether people believe it or not, we have actually got different ways of winning football matches at the moment at Everton. I think we've seen that, in fairness. So, I share your opinion on that.
We definitely have. People will know that I know Alistair Campbell, and he was saying to me for years, he said, don't come and get him now, but one day you should make Sean Everton manager. What he's doing at Burnley is incredible. People don't see it, he says, but I do, and I know him, and he's an incredible manager, and the way he goes about things is just what you need. And to be fair, he did say that a long time ago, and he is right on that. I think Sean has absolutely brought something, and I just think his mentality suits us as well. I don't know, I just I like the way he approaches things, and let's hope that we keep on building from here.
Yeah, definitely a good fit. So anyway, on to the main topic, as it were, of the show. And, I just want to kind of set the scene a little bit from your point of view. So, when we first, the charges were first laid upon Everton, the first set of charges, that is, and it was announced that we were going to be deducted 10 points. What was your initial, as a fan, reaction to that? And, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what all this means, from your point of view, what was your initial reaction to that?
I was stunned. Absolutely stunned. I couldn't actually take it in at first. That I sort of, still what I consider quite a technical breach. I mean, I'd been aware that they'd opened up to them as well, and I thought, well, clearly that, in my view, when I heard that, I thought, well, that's
commended.
Pardon?
Should be commended.
Well, I thought so. I thought, well, that, you know, my take on it was, and you know, I know people can go through lots of things that the club didn't get right, but I felt, oh, that's right. You know, as somebody who, you know, has had experience of regulation as a government minister, you know, so I've had a huge amount of experience of regulation of various sectors. That is a good principle, that you say, look, we're worried about something, you know, here's our concern, you know, what can you advise? You know, that is just a good principle when it comes to regulation. So to kind of have no recognition of that, when it actually is a kind of technical breach, isn't it? You know, where there's grey areas, isn't there, about the ground and the interest and all, you know, to kind of have none of that taken into account is, I say, it was, I found that quite sort of breathtaking, really. But when I've unpacked it more and more, as everyone has, you know, that has turned to you know, a sort of an anger, really, about the way this club has been treated. Where I just need to say, where is the respect, really? I mean, you know, founder member of the Football League, founder member of the Premier League, you know, a club that has always, to one degree or another, embodied some of the good values in football around the way things should be done. Let's not get into, say, all the recent positions that we've been in, but just think of the long run. The club has embodied a good tradition, hasn't it, in English football? You know, competing, good spirit of the game in terms of the way, you know, we've conducted ourselves off the pitch. Often a kind of a clash, really, with the way that they've handled difficult issues like Hillsborough and the way that the club supported Liverpool through that. But, you know, other issues as well. You know, there's always been there for the sort of wider football community. I just thought, you know, it's like there's people who are around now just don't see that football began when the Premier League began, isn't it? That's the mentality that they're bringing to this, isn't it? And, you know, this kind of sense of, oh, well, they don't matter anymore. You know, it's like, where I just do say, where is the respect? I don't see it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting, it's a very, very good point. And from my point of view, or my perspective, my, you know, limited understanding of judicial process, if you like, that's something that's always factored in. It's almost something that when the charges are read out, you know, we've considered Everton's track record, Everton's contribution to the Premier League, to football in general. That's almost the first line that comes out, isn't it? And before they start to, if you like, read out, you know, what the punishment is. So yeah, I share that kind of condemnation and
brutal,
isn't it? Around
brutal, sort of dismissive of our arguments. I mean, for none of our arguments to be given really any weight, you know, surely there's some weight in the fact that a player is just removed from the books. You know, there must be some weight in those arguments to it just dismissed. Yeah, I mean, it kind of, you know, reflects something worrying about the way football's going, though, doesn't it? You know, it's like, as I say, it's like this thing that, you know, it just annoys me always when, you know, talking about, you know, in Premier League history, X is the top goal scorer. Well, hang on a minute, you know, there was a lot of history before the Premier League, and I just really dislike that sort of the way the game is talked about these days.
Yeah, definitely. So, look, we're going to get into some specific questions. As most people have seen who are tuning in, we did put a request out for questions yesterday, and we got a ton of questions in. I have reworded some of them for the purpose of trying to create a bit of flow here. But I want to start with, I guess, you know, the most recent charge, the second charge, and the, you know, the term that's going around a lot at the moment, which is a term that's used a lot in law and in cases, etc. And that's the double jeopardy argument. So, you know, it's been the most recent charges are, if you like, a repeat of the previous charges, in that they are referencing years that we've already been punished for. Just explain again in layman's terms, if you don't mind, Andy, what in your opinion, how the double jeopardy argument applies here, and what that should mean to the most recent charge.
Well, that was a long-standing legal principle, isn't it? That, you know, somebody had stood trial in front of a jury couldn't be charged again for the same offence. You can't live always with a thing hanging over you. You can't be punished twice for the same thing, and you can't help but think that applies here. Surely, are they saying that there could be another 10-point penalty, and you don't sort of add the two things? You almost are asking this new process not to even consider that there's another process going on at the same time. Is that what they're saying, that these are going to be dealt with entirely separately, as though there isn't a sort of an appeal happening at the same time? I mean, think about that from a legal point of view. If somebody was to be charged again for something and they were still appealing it, it doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't to me anyway. Clearly there's one offence here, which is that the club's finances are out of kilter to some degree, aren't they? Because of, well, I would say there's a whole range of reasons for that, but one is obviously building a stadium. It's a difficult thing to do, isn't it? So that's the issue, isn't it? And I think what it reflects is a Premier League failure to have a clear regime in place with a clear way of doing it before it set off on all of this. That's the issue. There was not a kind of clear structure, is there? A transparent policy and a transparent sanctions regime. So before they then jumped into this, that wasn't there. So it leaves the feeling very strongly that they are to some degree making it up as it is happening. And we read now that they are going to change things again in the summer. There's a Premier League meeting apparently in February where they're going to discuss greater alignment with UEFA, which begs the question, is this what's happening to us kind of just a one-off that will never, new rules? And, honestly, where is the fairness in that? Where is the sort of consistency? I honestly don't see it at all. And hence the level of challenge that the Premier League are getting, and rightly so.
Thanks, Andy. And let's be clear here. I'm moving through the questions, but also making points as I go. People seem to be forgetting, I think, in the wider media, I guess, that Everton's fight, as you said at the start of your piece before, it's not us saying we're not guilty here, but the arguments, certainly in the first case of the 10 points, is the disproportionality of the punishment itself. And as you just said, due to the lack of process from the Premier League, from a fan point of view, and you include yourself in this as a fan, how do we continue to spread that message?
I think we continue to make our arguments, because there's a lot here that hasn't been aired properly. I do again feel that the whole thing isn't being handled properly. Also, from a media point of view, I'm not necessarily going to go make this a media issue, but I don't think we're getting the coverage that we should for an issue that actually affects all football supporters, as Forest fans have now found out. The idea that, this is this isn't important, this isn't significant, and people will know I did an interview on the pitch for Sky Sports News on the day when I sent my first letter to the Premier League, challenging a lot of what was in, at that point in the public domain, and that interview never aired. And I don't. They've never said to me why they didn't use an interview. I've never had that as a politician. You would never give an interview to a broadcaster and it just never appears. It's never happened.
Certainly without any acknowledgement from them to say, look, Andy, this has happened, that's happened. That is bizarre, isn't it?
It's really, honestly, really bizarre, because it's not, you give an interviewer 10, 15 minutes of your time, you're not doing that in the hope that they'll broadcast it. You're doing it in the firm expectation that they will. And that's basically how it always is. And to be fair, broadcasters always use things. Let me say this. I mean, I heard that they were asked this in a certain forum and said, oh, well, kind of news values changed on the day, and the news agenda moved on and other things were happening. Honestly, I just don't buy that. To say that this isn't a massive issue that needs a proper discussion and debate, and that there are other things happening, I don't buy it personally. I do think pressure was applied for the interview not to be broadcast. And I think this does then raise the question of the Premier League's fitness to regulate, because it has a relationship with broadcasters. It was in the middle of a rights negotiation at the time of this interview, and that actually is an issue to me, and I think it's an issue that needs to be debated in Parliament when the football governance bill arrives. Because, and I know, I mean, I just know from that day, because I was at the match that day, and I know from journalists who were contacting me what was being said in response to my letter by the Premier League, the briefing that was being given, some of it inaccurate. So I know actually how they operate at times, and that's not healthy. You know, this, I don't think myself this issue has had the media airing that it should have had. I think people are being tentative about it. They're pulling back. They're not discussing it. You know, look at the extent to which VAR issues are covered, but then they don't cover this. I'm not going to make it go further than that, Gary, but I think there is an important point here. I don't think it's been properly covered. Hence, it's been important for yourselves, and that's why I'm glad to be on today. You know, other podcasts, and I think we're lucky as Blues to have a lot of really good podcasts, and I try and support them all. So you know, I'm sorry, I just had something flashed up on my computer there. I'm definitely of the view that the understanding of the issues isn't out there yet, and we need to get that out there, and that is still work in progress. Yeah, I think there's a really serious point here.
No, and just briefly, and probably not the right way to say in your defence, but it's fair to say there's been some criticism of your involvement, the way you spoke up during this process. But let's be clear here, and going back to your point there, this is a society issue, isn't it? It's the kind of whole term of, if you tolerate this, ... You know what I mean? How far do we allow this to go?
100%. Yeah, a politician. I've been around long enough, and I take criticism on the chin where it's justified. And people have said, well, hang on a minute, why is the mayor of Greater Manchester getting involved in this? Well, firstly, there's a lot of Evertonians that live in Greater Manchester, but there's also a lot of genuine football supporters who, to be honest, are not the ones who'll be shouting the odds on X or wherever it is. They're the ones who will be saying, no, there are issues here. And they do need to be challenged. I think the vast majority of people are in that position. And obviously, as I go around, people's come over and say, yeah, you've been really harshly treated there, So to be honest, I think the vast majority of people are in that that position.
Of course. Sounds like your dog's criticising you a little bit there.
He said something wrong there. I don't know.
Like that. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
It was good timing there from him. So a few of the questions that we've had in relation to, or we've had a few questions, sorry, in relation to your correspondence with the Premier League, which is obviously significant here. You're fortunate enough to have some dialogue there. The Blues are obviously keen to hear something about. We briefly touched on this off air. So do you want to talk about what how that's gone, and what what's come back that you think is interesting that you're willing to share?
Well, I haven't been told that they want to publish it, so it's a difficult situation.
That's fair enough. That's good. That's fair to mention, by the way, because there was some suggestion. Yeah, there was some suggestion that you've maybe been told to or not to, and that's not the case, is it? You're just trying to make sure that it's you're being respectful.
It's for the Premier League to put its positions into the public domain, isn't it? And because obviously I don't want to do something that then people say, oh, you've breached the confidence, or you've
compromised.
Compromised the process. I don't want to do that. I as I say, I have experience of regulation. I know there are legalities involved. I try and do things properly all the time. However, in response to the first letter received from the Premier League, they put some of that, not all of it, into the public domain. So if you remember the second letter that I wrote, I quoted from parts of that Premier League letter. And the key bit, and this is the bit to focus, because I think it's really important to focus in our situation. The key bit that came from that was I said that the independent commission had talked about a policy that had been sent to them in the middle of the consideration by the Premier League. And I asked about, well, what is that policy? You know, and can we see it? And the letter came back saying that the Premier League didn't have a policy on a sanctions regime for the profit and sustainability rules, and that was a position of the clubs. But instead, it had sent a formula to the Premier League. So when I saw that word formula, I was just like, what? How can you have a formula and that not be a policy? To me, they are...
or within a policy.
Yeah, because then I wrote back to them in a second letter saying, well, what is this formula? Is it a formula just for Everton? And if it is how can that be fair? And if it isn't, you know, what is the policy then in relation to, you know, to the sanctions regime? And I asked the chair of the Premier League in that second letter to do two things: to publish the minutes of a Premier League board meeting of August 2023. I think around the time you and I were watching the Blues over an Estrella in Spain. And it's kind of relevant, really, isn't it? You know, a board meeting in August, and you rubber stamp a formula that then went in a submission to the Premier League, I think a week or so later. And, you know, all of that has never been fully discussed or disclosed. I said to the chair of the Premier League, surely the minutes of the board meeting of, I think it was the 10th or the 12th of August, should be published. And then secondly, the details of the formula as submitted to the independent commission should be published. And in the second letter that I sent, you know, the reply just avoided both of those questions. It didn't answer either of those questions directly, and I consider that revealing, that there's just no answer was offered to those questions, having had a long and detailed reply from the Premier League in the first instance. So there appeared to me to be a degree of selectiveness there, you know, in terms of what they would and what they wouldn't answer. I just don't see why they can't answer that question. You know, what is this formula? What is its status? Who agreed it? And what are the details of it as submitted?
The parameters, the parameters of the formula. It's again bizarre. Just continuing on that, I guess that thread. From watching Richard Masters at the Select Committee, it's clear, and you pointed this out off air and touched on it here as well, that there's a process problem. You know, aside from handing it over to the Commission in how they dealt with the particular issue, what was your reaction, and I guess your continued thoughts on the responses, some of, you know, Richard Masters' responses in relation to Everton's situation?
Well, as I said earlier, you know, I like to do things properly, and I like to consider things in detail, and I've done that with the evidence given last week. So I've read the transcript a few times, and I've thought about it carefully. And my conclusion is that I believe he came close to misleading the committee, or some might argue that he actually did. And I say that in relation to two things. Firstly, he said at one point that it was neither his nor the Premier League's policy, and hadn't been at any point, to try and stave off an independent regulator for football. Or I think he said to kick it down the road, or, you know, something like that. Now, I found that a very surprising statement, knowing that the Premier League were lobbying politicians very strongly in the period when, you know, we were in theory in breach of things, or we were in breach. You know, the period in question, they were lobbying very heavily at that period, and I know because I experienced some of it firsthand. So that did not seem to me to be a fully accurate statement. And I think it's relevant in this discussion because I do think the way they've gone into this enforcing the profit and sustainability regime from nowhere, without a transparent policy, without a transparent sanctions regime, is indeed linked to that kind of internal fear of an independent regulator that I know existed in the Premier League in that period, and I think their actions in a large degree have been kind of prompted by that attempt to try and either, if not get rid of a regulator altogether, to sort of significantly change what actually comes through in the government legislation. So the two issues are definitely linked. The second thing I would say, it was in answer to Rupert Hook MP, where she asked about the sanctions regime, and I don't know if it helps, Gary, for me to try and just call up
please,
the answer.
Please do.
I know it's
yeah, no, don't. By the way, I'm looking down myself, so I'm trying to make sure I get me questions correct and some of my facts correct. So yeah, I don't mind you. Yeah, you're getting that for us.
So Dr. Hook said the Everton criteria and how they have been deducted so many points is far from transparent. It is not in writing or anything. And the reply was, on that particular issue of the Premier League's approach to sanctioning, whether it is on a breach of PSRs or other rules, we have an open sanctioning regime. It is an active decision to leave it to the independent panel to decide, because it gives it maximum flexibility to decide in the circumstances, having listened to all of the mitigating arguments made by the clubs and the Premier League to make its own, and the Premier League to make its own decision. While that may not be clear, we believe it is fair. So now let me just come back precisely to what is said here. We have an open sanctioning regime. To be fair to Richard Masters, I don't think he's saying open in the sense of transparent there, is he?
Yeah.
I'm not going to claim that he's saying that.
No.
I think what he is saying is open as in we are not constraining the independent panel. It's open. We haven't prescribed an approach, and we leave it to them because we want this to be an independent process. That is what I believe he is saying. And then he goes on, he says, active decision to give the panel maximum flexibility. Having listened to the arguments, the mitigating arguments, the arguments are about the substance of the case, not about the details of the punishment. So to me, that does not accurately describe the Premier League's actions in August 2023, when there was a Premier League board meeting that agreed to sign off a formula, come back to that word, formula, and then send that formula to the independent commission in the chief executive's submission to that commission. And it's actually important to read what the commission said on that formula. They in a quite strong part of their ruling, said, we are not accepting this. They call it a policy. We are not accepting this policy. It's why I used that word policy in my first letter to the Premier League, because I was saying, well, what is this policy? And they were saying that changes the basis on which you, the Premier League, have set us up, if we are to now accept this policy in the middle of the process. I called it an abusive process, if you remember, in my first letter.
Yeah.
They even sent this policy in, and they reacted really aggressively in the media to say why I was so wrong. And well, I stand by it. I absolutely stand by it. And the commission, in my view, is pretty much saying the same thing. When you read their ruling, they're kind of saying we shouldn't have been sent this, is what they're saying. So, I don't believe what Richard Masters said to the committee is accurate. I believe it does get. I say I'm not going to. I'll reserve judgment as to which side of this I'm on. But I think it's a choice of he either got close to misleading the committee or he did mislead the committee, because that is not what was done. He gave the distinct impression when he spoke to the committee on Tuesday that they left it open. They let the commission decide, in
what the punishment was or what the punishment was going to be.
That's
and again, my basic interpretation of it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Andy, please. My basic interpretation of the punishment side of it as well is, if it was going to be a punch deduction, it would have to be a minimum of 6. I still don't see where that's been corrected by anyone. So again, are they not? whether this is related to the formula or whether it's just the boundaries for punishment. That's not completely open, is it?
Well,
there's no flexibility there, is there? Or there is, but there's flexibility to a certain degree.
Well, exactly. And I think it's been pointed out that the fine, sorry, the sanction that was handed down reflected what was in that formula that was sent. I mean, we've not seen that formula, so you can't say with certainty because they've not published it. But it was a sort of minimum of 6, and then an extra point added for every 5 million over the threshold. So that's where the 10 points come from. So
just on that one, just on that one, Andy, and I'm sorry if I interrupted something else you were going to say there. The 105 million, that's something that's been put forward, or by fans as a complaint or a mitigation, if you like. That was 10 years ago. The 105 million, I think, was originally set as this limit. Surely inflation is a huge factor here. Now, whether you call it a mitigation when other clubs are in the same situation, would that be something that you would use, or you think it's maybe, in some respect, it's something that all the clubs are straddled with?
No, I think it is relevant, because I think it goes to the heart of the kind of whole kind of handling of this, doesn't it? You bring in a regime, was it 2013-14 that they brought in this?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago,
yeah. You don't really do much with it. You certainly don't take the approach that's been taken in the last couple of years. You sort of, it's there, but is it really being enforced properly? Is it up to date? Are all the sanctions regimes in place around it? It's like it was there, but it wasn't really
left in a dusty filing cabinet. Well, let's bring it out now and let's start.
Well, that's
pushing.
how it feels, isn't it? So it wasn't updated. If it was an active regime when it came in, it would have said, right, the policy is to update these thresholds every 2 years, and that. So that wasn't done. So I think it is relevant. Yeah, I think it kind of points to that broader critique that I'm making, that all of a sudden, after the European Super League issue and the government's change of heart around a regulator, and the big change of context in that period, all of a sudden these rules, oh right, okay, we're on, but they hadn't got what people say their ducks in a row, had they? They hadn't lined up all of the policies that should underpin a. Sorry about the dog in the background.
Oh, that's okay.
They hadn't lined up all the policies to support. Hey. As what I was saying, they hadn't updated the rules and the thresholds, and I think that is what happened. We had a kind of a loose regime that was introduced. It wasn't particularly, they weren't focusing on it as an issue, but then all of a sudden the world changes, and the Premier League start to become worried about the threat of an independent regulator, and I absolutely believe that is what changed. That dog's trying to get on the camera now. That is what's changed.
A part in the show, to be fair. He could probably sit on that committee himself. Go on, sorry.
So that's where we are, and I don't see how we can go any further here without that formula being published. And what I'm considering is whether I've not discussed this with him yet, but I will do, whether Steve or Steve and I can write to the committee to express our concerns about whether or not the committee, as I say, has not been given the full picture that it should have been given, and actually whether it was actually given accurate information. I do believe the statement that they've got an open approach needs to be challenged. I do believe we need clarity on the status of the formula that was sent to the first independent commission. Is that same formula going to be sent to the second process? Is it going to be sent in respect of Forest? We need to know the answer to these questions, and I'm afraid, the impression given to the committee on Tuesday was not at all, in my view, what the Premier League has actually done in the case of Everton. So that, I think, is where it is this weekend, and it just gets more concerning to me. I think the handling of this is breaking sort of every rule in the regulator's handbook. You know, as I say, I've got long experience of regulation, so these aren't off the top of my head comments. You know, this does not follow the principles of good regulation at all, and the Premier League's got to decide how much further does it go down this path without correcting some of these very first order fundamental failures. In my view, the first thing it should do is publish the formula, publish the Everton formula, and tell us about the status of it. Now, they will say, oh, well, we may be changing it in the summer of this year. Well, if that is the case, it still leaves open the question as whether it is to be used this year.
Whether it's fit for purpose, yeah. Yeah.
But it's fit for purpose, but also, is it now being used in this second process against Everton and Forest?
Yeah.
No, and also just it begs the question of, is it fit for purpose, as you say, in terms of, is it a proportionate formula for these, you know, these breaches? You know, £20 million over a limit is more than a club going into administration. And actually, what is interesting, and I think the fans advisory board have become really active, and I think they've
come on to that now, yeah.
Submission in, and credit to them for the way that they're going about things. Really, I think it's impressive to see them sort of really come to the fore as they have. They've, I think, drawn the parallel with the Tevez situation, where
West Ham,
an independent commission said really directly that, you know, there was a relegation battle, and really this sanction, the fans didn't do it, the player didn't really know about it. It shouldn't you know, be them who suffer. Therefore, we're looking more towards non-sporting sanction, you know, routes to deal with this. You know, why that doesn't set any type of precedent, I don't know. And if you look in the government's white paper when it comes to the principles on which a new regulator will be based, it is around the fans shouldn't be the ones who suffer from regulation, and regulation should be about, you know, as far as possible, mitigating that impact. To reach straight to a sporting sanction, and the heaviest ever in the history of top flight football, something clearly is wrong there, isn't it? Something is wrong. And the only thing you can kind of conclude is it was Everton were a convenient scapegoat for the Premier League, a Premier League that was worried about the threat of an independent regulator. All of a sudden had to do something. Okay, right. Who's the easiest target? It's Everton Football Club.
And again, whether it's Everton or it's Forest, I think going back to your very first point, which was extremely significant, we were the first ones almost to go, hold on, you know, we've done something wrong here. We believe we're in the wrong. We've come forward with the evidence to suggest why we breached, you know, PSR, if you like, and as you say, it almost created that easy target. That's how it's okay, bang, we can show our muscle, if you like, our ability to regulate without interference, and yeah, that was the initial, you know, my initial feeling towards it all.
Well, absolutely, and you know, this kind of process, then the way they're handling, it's why their handling needs to be challenged at this point, and everybody should support what we're doing in challenging it, because if they're saying that there's no mitigation for a club saying, look, we're in a bit of a difficult situation here are the books. In fact, I heard it said at the committee on Tuesday that they want to get to a more real-time thing when they're sort of working with clubs to, you know. You're not
going to get there, are you, if this is the message it gives to other clubs?
Completely. So there's two problems with that, isn't there? You're setting a sort of, the way they've treated Everton means that people won't be forthcoming with information, because clearly there's no benefit to you in doing that. That's mistake number one in terms of creating the right regime going forward. Mistake number two is handing out the heaviest ever penalty in the history of top flight English football for a £20 million breach, which, as we all know now, is a fraction of the cost of a decent Premier League player.
Yeah,
you know, it's not even the full. I think Pat Nevin said it's the left leg of a decent Premier League player. That's the problem, isn't it? Because if that is set now as the bar, well, where do you actually go from here? you know, what does the game become then in terms of the kind of the decisions that could be made? You know, the kind of way that might skew the game in terms of, you know, points deductions becoming sort of a regular thing. And it says something here, doesn't it, about where is football going? Actually, decision making in football appears to me to be shot to pieces on and off the pitch, where you've got VAR destroying things in the moment, and then you've got this. You know, we've got to a point here where you can't celebrate a goal because you just think, well, what's coming here? So you've got that. And then you've also then got the thing that you won't be able to celebrate the end of a season, because the process that we're in now, the appeals will conclude after the end of the Premier League season. But what's this doing to football? You know, you might stay up on the last day, but you didn't stay up on the last day because some independent, unknown people in a room somewhere are going to say whether you've stayed up or whether you've not. You know, I think Dave Kelly from the Fans Advisory Board has made the point, you know, it's like transfer deadline windows now are about deadline days about, you know, who's got what QC and KC, I should say, you know, and
yeah,
you know, that's where the game is going. That's what those custodians of it at the kind of at the Premier League level are doing to it at the moment, and it's definitely everybody's fight. This is not just Everton's fight.
No, I couldn't agree more, Andy. And this brings us towards the close, and I'm glad you mentioned the Fan Advisory Board, because you want to bring them in now. That they've been terrific. Dave Kelly, again in particular, good friends of the show, and he's been a superb ambassador for the club in such a difficult time. Obviously, it's not only been yourself. You've mentioned Steve Rotherham, Ian Byrne as well has been involved. A number of influential supporters, you know, people associated with world politics, finance. You know, members of the House of Parliament, etc. So a lot of people are suggesting or asking the question, you know, why aren't the club coming out and lobbying? It's important to note that aside from Colin Chong's, you know, initial statement, which was made condemning the punishments of the, you know, that was laid down by the Premier League via the committee, the club have not been able to really voice their opinion or their stance on this, obviously to not impact on the process itself. Do you have a little bit of sympathy, and I guess is that partly fueling your voice and your communication, because the club can't actually speak out? Do you have sympathy for the club in that sense?
I do. I'll come on to that, Gary. But if I could first come back to what you said originally about the Everton Fan Advisory Board, I think they do deserve great credit and they deserve our support going forward. I think they have started to unify what has always been quite a fractured Everton supporter base. You know, through my life, I've kind of always it's never had the sort of unity sometimes as we've seen at other clubs. So it's now coming through, and the Fan Advisory Board, I think, have played a big role in that, and Dave certainly has, and you know, really deserves our credit. But credit to Julie, who represented us in Parliament. You know, that 100%. Is important. You know, I just think this is really what this club needs right now, isn't it? Showing people how much it cares, and I think Julie being there showed that, didn't it, to the nation? This is a club that we care massively about, and you know, we will never just accept it being treated in the way that it's being treated at this moment in time. Ian Byrne, again, thanks Ian for speaking out, and I want to, you know, he's my good and close friend, but the fact, if I say to Steve Rotherham, will you give up your Sunday morning and come down and help us out? And he does, you know. And Steve was there at the meeting that the Fan Advisory Board held last week. He's spoken out immediately and has done so repeatedly, and I think Steve deserves credit for that, and everybody else actually. I think, you know, the way in which, you know, the podcasts are all playing their part. I think it's impressive, and you know, I think there's a togetherness around Everton that obviously, you know, we've not had in a long time, and long may that be the case. But to come on to the position that the club is in, I think it is, for the reason that you gave, important that we're all doing this because it's hard for them to do it. They're in, you know, a legal fight on now 2 fronts, aren't they? As well as still completing a stadium. You know, this is a really difficult time for those involved with the running of the club. It's difficult for Sean. It's difficult for the players. And I think it's our job to insulate them as much as we possibly can from what's going on. Let's just be blunt about it. I don't think the criticism that where's the club and where's the club out there fighting, it is fair, actually, because when you're in a legal process, you know, that things said and everyone says stray words, and sure, I've done it in this interview. You know, you say things and was it perfectly worded? And well, that can count against you in a legal process. You know, people can use that. And again, they could use that to the detriment of the club in our position. So I think the club's position has got to be to make the right arguments in the right way in the two processes now in which they're engaged, and that their full focus should be on that. And as I understand it, their full focus is on that. That, I think, is their responsibility at the moment.
The best use of their time, yeah.
Definitely. And I just think we just need to, you know, I think as we go forward from here, it's just really important, isn't it, to sort of, you know, we are all thinking about everything, aren't we? And is, you know, who's doing the right? And, you know, I think let's focus on the issues, you know, focus criticism where it needs to be focused, and you know, keep doing what we're doing, because I personally think we are winning the argument. What we're saying, I think, is supported by a lot of people. And I just will touch on, I think you were alluding to it, a letter that was sent on Sunday morning, actually, to coincide with the fan advisory board meeting that was held. I don't think this got the media coverage that it should have done, going back to the point that I made earlier about our whole situation, in my view, not getting fair or appropriate levels of coverage. A letter sent to the Premier League, basically echoing lots of the things that I've said on here today, but the arguments that other people have put forward as well, from Dame Sue Owen, who is Sue? Well, she's a former permanent secretary at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, a very senior civil servant who had responsibility for the issues that we're talking about on here, Gary. You know, somebody who needs to be listened to, as is Sir Brendan Barber, who has obviously long experience in the trade union movement, but now is chair of ACAS. So Brendan mediates in disputes.
On a daily basis.
Extremely experienced in these matters. But then the third name, Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England. You know, if Mark is making a criticism of a regulatory regime, and particularly a criticism of a lack of transparency, he needs to be listened to, I would suggest. And, you know, it got some coverage, but I think it was a more significant intervention than people have realised. And hence, I would say that the voices are both in their number, but in their levels of influence are getting bigger and bigger. The Premier League clearly hasn't got this right. And I think the issue is, you know, just now saying it's trapped in these two processes and that's it. Well, I just don't think we can accept that as Evertonians. We have to challenge the way this has been done, the lack of transparency, the lack of a published sanctions framework, the lack of clarity as to whether that formula now applies to Forest as well as to us. Again, the lack of a policy on a double jeopardy situation. All of this, Gary, has to be challenged. It has to be challenged directly. And I think that there's a growing number of football supporters now who say, yeah, okay, we can see why, we can see how they feel as they do. It's important to say before we finish, isn't it, that again, for the avoidance of any doubt, nobody is saying that you know, Everton Football Club are blameless. Nobody is saying that things were perfectly done in that period. That we're not. No one has ever said that, have we? No. But what we are saying is things should be done in the right way, in a fair way, in a transparent way. And can anybody say at this point in the progress of this issue that is where we are? And I honestly don't believe that anybody can.
No, thank you so much, Andy, and some further encouragement for yourself and Steve, obviously, in your whether you consider writing to the committee, as the fan advisory board have now had their witness statements passed over to the committee via the Premier League. So the Premier League have confirmed that the fan advisory board's statements itself will be passed on. And again, I guess my if you like, plea as much as it's worth, is that anyone who is in a position that has got, you know, an ability to communicate well enough and has got significant points should try to do so and try to pass them on, because, you know, the more mitigation from various different contexts and, as you say, positions of influence, the better.
Absolutely, Gary. So just to, you know, to conclude, I mean, I will discuss this with Steve and we'll discuss our next steps, but I don't believe the exchange that we saw at the committee on Tuesday can just rest there. I don't consider that to be, if you like, something that can be left unchallenged. You know, as I say, in my view, the chief executive got close to misleading the committee, or you could say even did. It was, in my view, it was not an accurate description of what has happened to us. The idea that it was an open regime, well, what's the formula then if it's an open regime, and what's its status? I do think that position needs to be challenged, and more broadly, I think it needs to be challenged because the Football Governance Bill is arriving in Parliament, we're told, next month. So, you know, these issues become very live, and it's not entirely in the Premier League's control anymore because Parliament is intervening and they're taking some of this out of their hands. You know, that bill will have a second reading soon, and if you're going to fully inform parliamentarians when they consider that bill, things like the policy that's been applied to Everton and the policy intention for the use of that formula, whether or not they will or won't use it in respect of Everton again and Forest this year, those are matters now of public interest and public debate. And, you know, I would say to any, you know, anybody who's watching this podcast or listening to it, that you should write to your member of Parliament and call for the minutes of that call on your member of Parliament as part of the forthcoming debate on the Football Governance Bill to get Parliament to call, or the committee to call on the Premier League to publish the minutes of its board meeting of early August 2023, to publish details of the sanction regime, the formula that was sent to the Independent Commission, and then thirdly, get clarity on the question as to whether or not, well, what the status of that formula is and whether it will be applied again in respect or submitted to the new commission that will hear the case against Everton and Forest for the latest charge. Those questions need to be answered, and the Parliament can't debate this in the dark. Premier League seems to think everything can be done in the dark. Well, it can't. Not when a bill is landing. Not when a bill is landing in Parliament. So, in some ways, they're losing control of this situation. They've held all the cards up until this point, but they're not going to anymore. And that's why Evertonians, you know, do need to stick together here. We do need to keep working together, patiently, respectfully, get our points over, and our points have got increasing, I would say, influence and weight, and people can see that. And credit to everybody who's done this. Everybody's poured over these judgments. Everybody's helped each other understand them. I think we are coming to a really clear understanding of how unfair this situation is. So, you know, credit to everybody listening, everybody who's been involved. Stick together. Onwards, Evertonians, and, you know, this club will come through this.
Andy, thank you so much for your time, for your passionate and knowledgeable input this morning. Again, I'll listen again this afternoon and pour it over myself. But more than anything else, I appreciate your ongoing support for the club, and not just yourself, as you said. Credit the work of everyone else who is contributing to this. But on behalf of the podcast, on behalf of all Evertonians, thank you. As we always say at the end of every episode, regardless of the content, up the toffees.
You kept it clean there.
Yeah, I didn't put the middle one in.
Clean version.
Yeah, the clean version.
Yeah, we got a weekend. We've got a weekend where we can relax a little, can't we? And on the field, yeah. And next weekend we can enjoy a cup weekend, can't we? So yeah, great to see the club go through. So yeah, all the best, everybody. And yeah, I think, to be honest, I think anyway, we're really starting to sort of make headway here, aren't we? So let's keep at it. And well done to you, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
Top man. Thanks, Andy. Take care. I'll see you soon.
Cheers, mate. And you.